miss my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone, neath the halo of a street lamp. I turned my collar to the cold and damp, when my eyes were stabbed by the flash.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, grasshoppers. We're looking at Chess Informant Golden Game number 157. I know we've skipped ahead. I have quite a number of games. I've skipped ahead of the 1000 best of the best. The top 100 golden games from the first 100 Chess Informants is featured along with the other 900 games of sorts, as we had a panel of judges that decided upon the best games of the previous 4 to 6 month period of time of Chess Informant history. And for the most part, the Chess Informant library has quite a number of volumes that will improve your chess. The most recent volume to be added to our collection, besides Informant number 158, was Positional, Sacrifice, and Modern Chess. Now these are modern games featuring exchange sacrifices, pawn sacrifices, for positional gain and for positional benefit. The game we're looking at today is featured in the latest Chess Informant, Aurora. As many of you know, I'm returning to Iceland in March for the Reykjavik Open. And this particular game features World Championship Challenger candidate Vidit-Gurathi versus Vidit-Svidler in a match that was held in Nagpur, India, in June of last year. It is now 2024. In June of 2023, and this was a match where it was part of a Nagpur Chess Festival. I'm happy to say that the Indian chess community is booming. There are no less than 3 participants in the candidates event that is happening in Toronto this coming April. Toronto, Canada, this coming April. I'm looking forward to trying to make an effort to get there. Let's cut back on the volume of our desktop here just a little bit. As we get into the game. Now we are going to be featuring quite a number of possibilities here, and we'll be doing our candidate moves for a certain period of time. Now where is our timer? Oh, we don't have the timer open, obviously, or do we? There we go. Unfortunately, at the moment, it is over our... Whoops. It is over our music selection. Debating on whether or not we move the music or the timer. Let's try to put the timer right next to the music selection. That might actually solve 2 birds with 1 stone. And that way we won't lose. Well, let's leave it at that. The 2 most important things are there. Now, Vidit is known for a particular brand of spectacular attacking chess. Now, in this particular game against Vidit-Svidler, he avoids Vidit-Svidler's pet Grunfeld with the move c4. Now this is the first game of the match, so it's questionable whether or not Vidit will be challenging the candidates of participants in Toronto in April in theoretical lines, or if he's going to play positional chess such as this for a less sharp position where he can create his own brand of spectacular chess later on. Now, e5 is the best move. You have a reverse Sicilian. This is how I learned the English opening / reverse Sicilian. I answered c4 with e5 because I was an e4 player when I started out, and it's highly recommended this is the way that you might continue. After the move g3, I would more than likely recommend knight f3 followed by d5 in open Sicilian, reversed open Sicilian standards. There are other possibilities. While knight f6 may be the second best move in the position, it's also possible to fight for the center with Kara's defense and try to play for d5, as this is like a reversed Alapin / c3 Sicilian. Svidler, on the other hand, decides to approach this in a very simple manner with what might be called an English Grand Prix attack. The English Grand Prix attack, or the latest version of the Grand Prix attack, involves bishop to e2 and f4 against Sicilians. Now, of course, this is after the d pawn is usually committed, because d4 is the number one response. If your opponent is developing slowly, not getting their pieces out, then your best course of action, as recommended over the course of time, is to blast the center with d4. This puts immediate pressure on e5, threatens the trade of queens, may impair black's castling capability, and at the same time black has to deal with this threat, and he chooses the quiet move, bishop to e7. Now remember, Vidit-Svidler is black in a match of perhaps a half a dozen games. I did not look at the match length, but I do know that Vidit-Svidler is merely trying to get the ball rolling here. And after the move bishop to h3, a very uncommon idea, but it's certainly addressing the issue of what is white going to do about the weak lights. What is black going to do about the weak light squares? Personally, I might have preferred a move like knight h3, or continued quietly with bishop to g2 to see what in the world is going on here, putting pressure on b7. However, after the move bishop to h3, Vidit-Svidler again finds a very speculative move in the form of knight a6. He's assuming that he's going to get... I'm assuming that he's just going to get the c5 square for his knight. And in this manner, he is approaching the center from the side. I think perhaps grabbing space on the queen side with a5 and preparing a home for this knight with the move a5 could have been better. After all, we don't want that knight getting kicked away. Now, as it turns out, because we might know the course of a knight on the edge of the board being less than optimal, Vidit-Svidler does have his work cut out for him. So immediately we open up the center lines, we exchange queens, and we immediately begin to put pressure on the center, since the knight can no longer naturally defend the e5 pawn. This means that Vidit-Svidler has a few choices. He either has to commit his bishop to the f6 square, which might be best, or he should go on the counterattack with knight to b4, threatening knight to c2, and perhaps after that he might actually consider returning to the c6 square and defending his pawn. However, Vidit-Svidler is by no means a passive player, so while the move knight to b4 appeals to me greatly, Vidit-Svidler chooses the next best e4, grabbing space and solving some of his problems, also ensuring that his bishop may have quite a bit of activity on this diagonal. The number one rule for all openings, for all of you here, the number one rule for all openings is that you coordinate your pieces to the best of your ability. You find the best squares as early as you can, and you coordinate your pieces to the best of your ability. Centralizing your pieces is a valuable part of that plan. And now Vidit-Svidler, who is a well-known Grunfeld player, decides to defend his pawn with a very natural move, and this also includes the possibility of fianchettoing his bishop on the long diagonal via f6. Now Vidit could challenge the center immediately with a move like f3. Or, as I just mentioned before, he could calmly continue his development and not start playing the game without having set up his pieces in the opening. Basically, the opening is only a phase of the game where you set up your pieces to play the rest of the game. I repeat, the opening phase of the game is only where you choose how to set up your pieces, and only after you set up your pieces do you begin playing the game. Most of the younger players, that is, players of lesser experience, has nothing to do with age, the younger players of the game will choose to start playing the game without setting up their pieces. They will leave their rooks in the corners. They will forget about perhaps king safety because they're anxious to just get started. Just because your pieces are placed on the board does not mean that you have set up your pieces. In this particular case, of course, after bishop f4, it's very clear that Vidit is entertaining the option of castling queenside. He's pressuring this pawn. His knight may come into the center, so Vidit-Svidler takes a very circumspect route and plays c6. But a lot of consideration probably should have been given to the move knight to f6 developing much more quickly instead. However, after the move c6, there's nothing wrong with this necessarily, he might also have the possibility of fighting against the bishop on f4, which is very strong, exchanging one of white's bishops, especially his better placed bishop, is key. So, in this particular instance, after the move c6, white does castle queenside, even though, once again, just as any younger player might, he could have perhaps tried to break down and attack white's center first. But notice that his pieces are not set up, his rooks are not ready to enter the center of the board. So Vidit's castling is very, very in tune with what a strong player would absolutely consider playing. Note that bishop to e5 attacking the rook would easily be rebuffed by the move bishop to f6. And in fact, we might even lose time trying to defend our bishop, and we might have to exchange and assist black in his development. And having moved the same piece twice to e5, a third time to f6, we've actually alleviated some of black's problems, because his bishop will have solved its problem of being on the back rank, and the knight will have reached the f6 square where it can control the center. So, only after this. Now, Vidit-Svidler does need to get his king out of the center. He does need to choose how he's going to coordinate his pieces, and at this moment the king's still in the center. Notice how far behind black is in development. We're on move number 11, ladies and gentlemen, and basically we already have a problem with our pieces on the back rank. Vidit-Svidler is behind so much time, which is a major element in determining whether or not one player has an advantage over another. The number one element that we all know about is material. Material absolutely determines whether or not.
Said, how do you exploit at f3 and try to open center?
Absolutely. That is absolutely Vidit's choice here. But notice that with the element of time, we have to move quickly and we have to move assertively in order to open up the game against our opponent's king. So after the move e takes f3, e takes f3, black once again has to choose how he's going to keep all of his pieces secure and connect his rooks. The primary goal for most younger players in connecting the rooks is making sure that they first of all can see each other, and right now black has 3 pieces in the way of that path. So king to f7 fits in naturally with this, and after rook on h to e1, you can see that white has a greatly ideal situation. The black knight on f6 is restricted by pawn on c4, and g4 and e4 squares are restricted by the pawn on f3. So now white just has to choose how to pursue his advantage beyond this. Now he's got the 2 open files. If he gets a rook to the 7th rank, this will be devastating. So now it's really Vidit-Svidler, who I've known since 1994, roughly, when he was, I would estimate he was like 17 years old, give or take. I remember the year was 1994 because we held the tournament over my left shoulder, the Days and Nights of New York. It was roughly a year before the World Championship held in New York at the top of the World Trade Center.
If Black responded to F3 with 0-0, also sorry about TDS.
No, that's absolutely important. This is a sub-only chat for this particular stream. Basically, if Black tried to just castle in this position, I think there's very close to having we're very close to having a pawn hanging here. We're also going to be losing on the e6 square with a potential fork at some point, because basically when we pry this open, the e6 square is going to become weak. So for example, when the king castles, he may actually be too far from the action. Here he can at least control some of the key squares in the center, which brings me to a great story with my good friend, International Master-elect Donnie Ariel. When he played in the U.S. Championship of 2001 and I was there coaching him, we worked on an extensive plan as Black against Grandmaster Alexander Ivanov. It was a Khan Sicilian, and Grandmaster Alexander Ivanov, I think, played his patented G3 system against the Khan Sicilian. Donnie and I had come up with the concept that he should play King E7 to hold the dark squares in the center. And apparently, when I was watching the game, while it was being played, he just chose to opt to castle instead. And he ended up getting devastated on the dark squares. Apparently, International Master Greg Shahade had had a telephone conversation with him minutes before the game, wherein the preparation was reviewed, and International Greg Shahade said, King E7, that's ridiculous. Why don't you just castle? And there went the game. I was like, what are you talking about? You need the king as an active piece. You can't be tucking him away at a moment when he's needed. You know, and of course he realized it immediately. He's like, I shouldn't have listened. We should have gone with our preparation. So as it turns out, after F takes E4, knight takes E4, knight takes E4, F takes E4, we have the move bishop takes C8, rook takes C8, and bishop E6. This does solve some of Black's problems, but this pawn on E4 could become a rather tragic weakness. Notice how far the king is from the action. We also have a very devastating move maybe in the fact that bishop to E6 check, the king has difficulty moving because we have further ways of exploiting this, right? So after bishop to E6, Black might be forced to capture. If he plays king to H8, bishop to E5 check, bishop F6, rook on H to F1 to take advantage of the pin on the back rank. It's just getting very awkward for Black. So while castles might be a natural move, I have to admit, natural moves, and this is one of my favorite quotes from my teaching career, natural moves could accidentally lead to natural disasters. You have to be very, very careful about natural moves. You have to address the detail in each and every position. And in this particular case, he solves the problem of having a weakened pawn on E4 and weakened squares in the center by exchanging and tucking his king away on the F7 square. Now this position is relatively equal. I say relatively equal because there are equal chances for both sides, not because it's a draw. When the rook comes to the center, we talked a little while ago about Black placing his bishop on C7, and that is indeed what he should have done. This is an incredibly strong piece. One of the number one questions you have to ask yourself is, where are the worst or best placed pieces in the position? And if you cannot improve your worst placed piece, which bishop on D8 certainly qualifies as one of them, you might be able to fight against your opponents or displace your opponent's best placed piece. And this is relatively key. Displacing your opponent's best placed piece may be just as valuable. So certainly I would give this move, actually I will upgrade this move because Vidit-Svidler played the move bishop to E7, which turned out to be passive. I'm going to upgrade that move to almost an exclam because it's almost key in addressing the situation on the dark squares with this bishop, and it may even assist in the return of the knight or the better placement of the knight should white choose to exit the diagonal with the bishop on f4. So after the move bishop to e7, in fact, the move bishop to c7 was previously played by
said. I assume b7 opens up exchange sack ideas too.
Possibly. I don't know if we have to go quite that far, but honestly, the move bishop to c7 was played by a lesser-known grandmaster, Vakidov versus Nordebek, Yakubov. And of course, that game ended in equality in a draw a couple of years before, almost exactly 2 years before, in May of 2021. Now, white plays a speculative pawn sacrifice. Arsenal fan mentioned a possible exchange sacrifice. I don't completely know that this bishop is in the game enough to perhaps go for that. I love the idea, though. I can see that the weakness of the dark squares and the absence of this bishop may be telling. There's a lot going on in this position. But unfortunately, we just don't quite have enough pieces without the bishop on h3. That is our worst placed piece, and we have to address that. So, interestingly enough, where do you think this bishop will be well placed? Given that you know what white's next move is. White's exceptional next move.
Arsenal fan Ricky
said.
Yes.
bc4.
Clears the square c4 for the bishop, so that after the bishop takes c5, of course this was an opportunity for him to centralize his pieces, to try to barnacle in the center, to try to coordinate his pieces once and for all. But instead, Svidler accepts the pawn sacrifice. He had other options, of course, as well. He could have rerouted this knight toward the center and fought against the bishop on f4, but instead he chose the rather questionable move bishop to c5, and I think he just wasn't quite warmed up. As I know Peter, he's a very sharp player, and he's usually very attentive to detail, but he just missed the move bishop to f1, which improves black's pieces. So now, just when we're getting everything into the action, the king is sort of forced away from the center, and now we have suggestions for white. Let's do some candidate moves for white. This is where we want to find several moves. Ideally, we want to find several moves for white that may improve our position. Remember, you're not looking for the absolute best move, but you're considering all of your options, and then you can subject them to further analysis. Your goal here is to at least be in the same area of thought, the same sweet spot as the grandmaster in question. So we have a few choices. Whether we choose to ruin our opponent's pawn structure and try to go for the win of a
Arsenal
pawn.
fan Ricky
said. b5 nce2 ne6.
Very good, Arsenal fan. You have one of, if not two of the key ideas in the position. And of course you have the move that was played in the game. The move bishop takes a6, I think, would be played by most younger players. Most younger players may go for the immediate pacifier, as Bobby Fischer often did when he was very insecure. Bobby Fischer always went for the win of material when he was insecure, against Spassky in game number 1, and at many other times in his career, such as in the King's Gambit, accepting Boris Spassky's pawn when he lost to him in Saigon in 1960, I believe. So needless to say, having material in hand is a great pacifier. It makes you feel good. But on the other hand, having the patience and the strength to fight for squares with moves such as bishop to e5 are key. Now after the move knight to c7, we have to find one more key move. And we will do more candidate moves for white. By the way, If you're studying on your own, using a book of any nature, especially a book like Chess Informant, where you might be able to cover the moves very easily with a 3x5 notebook card, maybe cut out with a little indentation to be able to go across the moves, it will help immensely to be able to...
Arsenal Fanriki
said. NB3.
Now, knight b3 is only one of several moves that need to be considered. You do have to consider this. Two minutes might be a little too long, considering that you could pause this video on your own. So let's adjust that while we're at it.
Arsenal Fanriki
said. BC7NB3NA4.
And this is one of those occasions where if you were to consider three moves, right, and you are able to determine that your candidate move is included Vidit's choice, the game would be considered like you've equaled Vidit. If for whatever reason his move escaped you for whatever reason, it might be considered a loss of a positional nature. So, interestingly enough, there's an incredible bit of overworkedness here involved with bishop takes c7, rook takes e1, rook takes e1, and bishop takes d4. Mr. Lonely Chess, thank you for the follow. We're having a sub-only quick instructional for YouTube. You may also find this video and many others like it on YouTube as we discuss the golden games of Chess Informant. Chess Informant has been the leading journal for professional players since the late 1960s. In fact, Tigran Petrosian referred to most... Tigran, Grandmaster and World Champion Tigran Petrosian referred to most of the modern Grandmasters as Chess Informant babies. Basically, today we have internet children, but in those days we had a classification of games and opening systems, the number one book of which I would highly recommend is the 1000 Best of the Best, a volume of games absolutely guaranteed to induce thought. So as it turns out, Arsenal fan Vidit actually chose the move g4 with the idea that these two knights are balancing each other out. He decides to threaten immediately a quick pawn rush against the pinned knight. And unfortunately, Svidler is desperate in this particular position because he can't weaken the e4 square either. So he either has to buck up and try to just put his rook on a safer square, guarding the knight, perhaps developing and doubling rooks, or he has to address the situation immediately. He chose drastic action, which of course the position is already spiraling out of control. He tries the exchange sacrifice with rook takes e5, rook takes e5, and a bit of counterattack with knight to d7. Note though that this does not solve his problem of coordinating his pieces. Bach has basically failed as one of the top grandmasters in the world, as an 8-time Russian national champion. He's actually failed in setting up his pieces in the opening. And if this happens to someone like Vidit-Svidler, you can imagine that it could easily happen to us. Now, Vidit-Svidler follows up with this idea of harassing the bishop. It's just that he does not plan on Vidit not cooperating. Candidate moves for white. Now remember, try not to look for the best move. Try not to overly focus on what you think the best move is until you have your complete shopping list of candidate moves with which you can prioritize and sift and sort and choose your moves. This is one of those key moments. And of course, if you're sitting at home watching the video on demand,
NB3NE6BB3.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have hit the nail on the head. So for the most part, if you wish to contribute, by the way, it is also possible to contribute via YouTube for these discussions, as these are geared a little bit more towards the timeliness and eternalness of YouTube. It'll be found in the Gold Game section of our playlist there. 96 check indeed. I wish I could give it 2 exclamation marks. In fact, you know what? I will give it, 2 exclamation marks. Just because we do not defend what our opponent attacks, we throw back at them exactly what we need to. Now notice that Vidit-Svidler is actually getting very close to completing his development. He chooses to centralize his king, coordinating his pieces. Good morning, no words. Our eternally awesome mod. Bishop to b3, rook to e8 could have probably been a better move, because rook to f8 seems to lack a little bit of purpose. I'm not entirely sure what the future holds in this particular file, given that black... We are doing one of our golden games from the Chess Informant, the best of the best. And the first volume of such games was published as the 1000 Best of the Best, featuring the 100 best games of each and every Chess Informant of the first 100 volumes. So here we have another opportunity for white to show that he can grab space, right? So white simply grabs space, also once again threatening to push black's king from the center, so black has to defend, and we are going to look for candidate moves for white again. We're going to take a moment to consider all of our options. Again, try to refrain from overly focusing. I'm going to close the blinds as the sunrise has managed to come up. Again, the opening is merely a phase of the game in which we want to set up our pieces. White has succeeded in doing that. Black is still struggling to find the best squares for his pieces. And he may have to change his mind about his placement of his pieces soon.
Up your skirt a little more and show you the world to me, baby.
All right, moment of truth, everyone. We are going to be insistent upon shoving that king backwards, as they cannot capture on g4 because they cannot relinquish the e4 squared to this, to this fork on the king and the bishop. So the bishop is hanging. Black makes one last effort to coordinate his pieces. This king is shoved further from the action. Black's best placed piece is removed from the board, and now white merely needs to penetrate with his rook and improve his last worst placed piece, the king. And it was at this moment that Vidit-Svidler realized that he had little, if anything. His knight is paralyzed against the threat of rook to d7 check. His pawns could easily be falling in no time here because the knight is overworked. It's not that easy. We're also threatening to bother black's pieces in a variety of ways with knight to a4, such as if black were to play the move h takes g5, h takes g5, perhaps bishop to b4. Is that really a threat? White will still just continue removing the defender of the 7th rank with knight a4. So it was in this position that black chose to resign. I do want to thank everyone for being here, and I want to thank Chess Informant for the opportunity to showcase the instructional awesomeness of Chess Informant number 158. At the beginning of each new informant, they consider the best games of the previous
G4
informant.
was stunning.
G4 was a very deep positional move, and I look forward to hopefully highlighting the other latest book, because I'm positive that I'm going to be using this book in Chess Camp today. They have complete games featuring the top grandmasters and their strategic sacrifices for gains in position. In any event, I want to thank everyone for being here. Cheers and ciao as we head out. We're going to head over to someone that could
Tag kindly.
Nowers.
contribute to our strength
Leaving so soon on.
as well. We have a rare Lee chess moment for GM Nixons, Archer's Nixons. Have a great day, everyone. Cheers and ciao. Please tune in to our French Bishop Chesscast. It has taken off a bit. We will discuss further controversy, and we are preparing for the candidates tournament in Toronto in April. Please enjoy the French Bishop Chesscast on any of those links provided there, as well as, believe it or not, make sure that you subscribe to YouTube and join the Discord. Follow me on Chessable. All those links can be found there. Cheers and ciao, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you for the follow, Mr. Lonely Chess. Please chime in next time, as we will not have subs only chat normally.